telling him to do. And then after that, he goes on a ketogenic diet, and he rose from, I think, like California to Hawaii with his wife. I mean, his athletic performance doesn't suffer at all. So we know that exercise is necessary, but I would say it's not sufficient. I think fitness is not a guarantee. It's certainly a variable, and it's important, but the body's internal metabolic environment is shaped by what you feed it, and not just how hard you train it. And I think that's really where Medfix is putting a stake in the ground and saying we need to do better with the nutrition education, because that is what is driving the mitochondrial damage and the metabolic disease. We have to remember, those are the elite athletes, right? So most people are far worse off. 88% of Americans, sorry to my international friends, you guys aren't far behind though, so you're not off the hook, are metabolically unhealthy. And 6 in 10 adults have one chronic disease. 4 in 10 have 2 or more. This is becoming normal. We cannot let this be normalized. So if most of the country is sick, who's profiting from this? And this is really where I get excited, because I think we've got to understand how entrenched these systems are, because it's your role to try to untangle them for everybody who comes into your gym or your clinic. So you have to understand this isn't just people don't know what to eat. This is by design. So $4.9 trillion was US healthcare spend in 2023, and 90% of that went to chronic disease management. Not treatment, not reversal. This is all disease management. So the sicker people are, the more money flows through the system, which re-incentivizes all of those profit centers to keep doing the same thing. So this is somewhat new information for a lot of people. It really is a rabbit hole that I fell into a couple months ago, but the American Medical Association earns the majority of their money, so hundreds of millions of dollars, off of these billing codes. So I had been under the false impression, as somebody who's been very skeptical and looked at this stuff for 20 plus years, that the American Medical Association was an association of doctors. It was a medical society. Doctors paid dues, they had conferences, that this was sort of what the system was. Not at all. Their job is to come up with standard of care billing codes that they then sell to hospitals, insurance companies, and government agencies. And when you look at this from a strategic perspective, it's really a closed loop system. So pharma goes to the American Medical Association and they lobby them for protocols, right? So standard of care models that pharma has introduced, they can go to the American Medical Association and say, hey, we have this new treatment for type 2 diabetes. It's called GLPs, right? We have these rigorous trials. The regulators are approving of these things. We need billing codes. Great. So then you get a billing code. And then what happens? So then you go to the doctor's office, and the doctor pulls up their computer, and they can only order tests and they can only order prescriptions based on what codes are available to them. So they are controlling your access to care through these billing codes, which are proprietary and all controlled by the American Medical Association. So you will only receive care based on what the code says. And that code is coming from an organization that is getting the second biggest participant is the lobbying money from the pharmaceutical industry. There's no codes for prevention. There's no codes for reversals. The codes for nutrition counseling and metabolic education are certainly improving, but they're nowhere near at the level. They're probably harder to find. I'm sure we have doctors in here who could talk about ordering, the sort of whatever you want to call it, metabolic nutrition prescription. It's not always available, and it's certainly not as popular as we would all like it to be. So the American Heart Association, not that different. You're going to start to see a pattern here. So things like their Heart Healthy check, which is sort of like their Good Housekeeping seal of approval, you have to pay for. So it's pay for play to get that. And what are they approving? Juice, sugar cereals, snacks, polyunsaturated fats, our seed oils that we know are problematic. That's all being funded and then being approved, and then you as the consumer see, oh, this is a heart-healthy cereal. The American Heart Association is saying so. How are you supposed to know any better? This is all a farce. American Diabetes Association. I could just flip through these. You're going to start to see a pattern here, right? So Almost all of the money from the American Diabetes Association comes from the insulin manufacturers who are now obviously pivoting and making the GLPs. The American Diabetes Association, despite all the work that Virta's done and all the work that communities like ours have done, has never published a paper on diabetes reversal through diet. Why? Because it's not true? Because there's no money, right? The lobbying in the United States, $4.7 billion since 1998 comes from pharma. So we have the bureaucratic center feeding the hospitals these billing codes, controlling what access to care you all have and what protocols doctors can actually prescribe. But we have regulatory bodies, right? We have the FDA, we have these government organizations who are supposed to be the watchdogs, and they're supposed to come in and protect us. They've been captured too. They write the rules, and then they sell the treatments of those rules back to the people. And so this is more money than oil, defense, tech, more than anybody. I mean, imagine how many massive industries we have in this country. And more money is being spent lobbying on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, as somewhat of a libertarian, I kind of think like, you don't need to spend all of this money if your stuff works, right? If the treatments all work, then the doctors want to prescribe it. Then if the treatments all work, then you're asking for it, and you don't need to go back to the doctor, and you certainly don't need to buy all the regulators or control all the billing codes. And they control the narrative. So as a former investigative journalist, this is something that I've been obviously very interested in, but it's about 25% of the evening news across all right, left, center, doesn't matter. Funding comes from pharma. Now, when I was a kid and a journalist, I never felt like I never had any advertiser influence. I don't think it's possible now. I think if a quarter of your budget is coming from Pfizer, you are not going to challenge the Pfizer CEO when you have him on for your nightly news program. I think he's paying your salary, you're not going to do it. The US and New Zealand are the only two countries in the world where you can market directly to a consumer. And again, I've said this in other talks, but I think it's really important to notice that I don't think all of us are watching the nightly news and hearing that like you're going to have anal bleeding and running out to our doctors and asking for that prescription with all the lists of side effects that they have to now say. But it's the advertising money. So it's controlling the news more than it is a concern for me that you're going to go home and ask your doctor for that medication. Now, we know some of that is not true, and a lot of this is actually over-the-counter medication too. And so somebody does a really slick ad about some new thing that helps with headaches, and you might be more willing to try it because of the ad. So it's not nothing, but I think the power is more with the actual editorial board. So the regulator